Here I am at the Church of the Primacy of St. Peter near Capernaum. Behind me is the church itself. Out to my left is the beautiful Sea of Galilee. And behind me is what many people think is the dock from first century Capernaum, where Jesus might have been many times with Peter and the other apostles, maybe watching them come in from getting fish, and where he may have called them at one point. And whenever people come to sites like this, one of the things that they ask naturally is, how do we know this is the exact place, or this is the exact site where Jesus was, or where he did a certain miracle? And it's a good question. And to answer that, we go back to Constantine, who was the emperor in 325 AD. And he wanted to do the same kind of things to answer that very question. And so he sent his mother, Helena, over to the Holy Lands. And she went around the Holy Lands looking for sites of the most important events of Jesus' ministry: his birth in Bethlehem, his death and resurrection in Jerusalem, and many other places as well. She would go to those villages and she would ask the people who'd lived in those villages hundreds of years where those events happened, and they would take her to the places, and they would show her the cave, for example, where Jesus might have been born in Bethlehem, or the garden where Jesus might have been crucified and then buried just a little bit at distance from the cross. And again, we still have that same question. How do we know? That was 300 years after the events. How do we know those were the actual places? You have to remember that in those days, people didn't live in a town for 5 years and then move. They lived in the same place generations upon generations, maybe hundreds of years of family history in a certain town. And if you grew up in a town like that, and you walk down the streets and you listen to your parents and grandparents tell the stories about what happened in that town, they would walk past the place and say, remember, this is where this particular event happened. And it would just kind of naturally pass into the lore of what you knew about your town, and you could share that with other people. And so that's how Helena got the location of many of these places. And once she marked the places, then she kind of nailed the places down more permanently by building some sort of monument, or often a church, in those places. And even though many of those churches have been destroyed over the years, they've been rebuilt in the same places, so that they still mark the places where we think those events actually happened. If you think about what we know about Jesus, naturally we'd like to see something physical from Jesus himself, maybe something he made growing up as the son of Joseph, a carpenter or a mason. We'd like to see a house he lived in. We'd like to see some concrete evidence of a miracle that he did. And yet there's nothing, as far as we know, concrete of Jesus' ministry that we have physically. What Jesus chose to do was to actually make his permanent impression on human hearts. And so Paul talks about how we ourselves as Christians are letters written with the Spirit, human hearts. Jesus talks about how we're living stones, and we're built into become a holy temple. That's what Jesus left permanently for us, and that does last forever.
We are at the Church of the Primacy of St. Peter, right beside the Sea of Galilee, and behind me is the church itself. It's not every church that has a rock sticking out of it, but this is no ordinary rock. The sea used to, although there's a great considerable distance right now, in Jesus' day, the water came right up here, and it's believed that this was actually a dock. And so if you can imagine in your mind's eye the Sea of Galilee covered with boats, all kinds of boats, personal boats, commercial fishing boats, the kind of boats used by Peter and Andrew and James and John. But this is where they very well, we think, tied up. And so it was at a place like this, if not this very spot, and it seems like a very likely spot, that Jesus asked simple fishermen to come follow me. And amazingly, Scripture says that they left their nets behind and they dedicated their lives to following him. And he promised them. He said, if you will come follow me, I'll let you trade professions. You now fish for fish. With me, we'll fish for the hearts of human beings. And so this is the Church of the Primacy of St. Peter, and this is the dock.